Afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this seminar in the Impact space. It's great to have you. How's everyone feeling on the last day? Slightly ready for your own bed, but also full up of all of God's goodness and everything that you've been inspired with. We're really excited to be thinking and talking today about church community transformation. And I've got some of my friends and colleagues here who are going to be sharing about what I believe to be the, and I wouldn't say this lightly, the best model of community transformation in the world. And I think it's incredible. Pioneered by Tear Fund, and then you'll hear how it's been then adapted into the UK. And I'm hoping that you will be inspired, but also equipped, and it will give you a tool, perhaps in your hand, to partner with God to see your community transformed as well. So we will do that we've got from 2:30 till 4:00. It'll be interactive and full of lots of inspiration. And at 4:00, we've got some snacks arriving, and we have a community workers reception. And I'm assuming we've got a bit of a similar crowd here now to what might come at 4. You've got under absolutely no obligation to stay, but also if you are working in the community as part of your church or a third sector organisation, you are really welcome to stay at 4:00, and that will be then a little bit more information and opportunity to connect and chat. So before we do any of that, I'd love to welcome Becky Ingamells, who works for Tear Fund. She's incredibly inspirational communicator and very passionate about church and social justice. So please give Becky a really warm welcome.
Thanks, Joy. So it's always a treat to be with any group of people talking about church and community transformation. And in a minute, I'm going to unpack a little bit about what that is and how we're involved at Tear Fund. I don't know about you, but I find as a Christian, I'm a Christian, and I think that Christianity is amazing, and I follow Jesus, I love praying, and you know when you talk to the other people that don't have any faith at all, you just want them to kind of get it, because you know that if they get it, they're going to have, it's really going to be transformative for their life. And when I first started hearing Tear Fund talk about church and community transformation, I didn't really know what they were talking about, if I'm honest, which is bad because I now work there. But actually, when I began to just change my mindset and listen and read and understand what it was and how it empowered people to transform their own communities, I went on a bit of a shift. And it's like, when you see things, you can't unsee them anymore. So I feel like I've been on my own bit of a journey with this, and now I can't unsee how powerful it is and how empowering it is and how much success there is for communities working through this process. So I'm just going to start off this seminar by explaining a bit of what church and community transformation is. Then I'm going to show you a video, and my colleague Buddy is going to share a little story about that. And Simon is also going to talk about how that impacts UK churches in working in this way. And we're also going to have a bit of time for Q&A and asking different questions. I'm hoping that in this session we can just get under the skin of this a little bit more. So basically, as Tear Fund, and I do love Tear Fund, I do think we're an amazing charity, but actually Tear Fund's real vision and Tear Fund's real heart and belief is actually the church is the answer to the world. Not Tear Fund, however much I love working for Tear Fund. And we see that the church globally is in nearly all apart from a minority of countries and places for complex reasons, but in many communities, church is central to the community. Church is well placed to transform its community and share the gospel, share transformation, because they are so central, and they know their community, they're in relationship with the community, they're often respected in their community. So we believe that the church is the answer for the transformation of communities and the world, and we work currently with 25,000 churches globally, and what we do is train, facilitate, equip, inspire, really get behind those churches so the churches are transforming their communities. Now, We've been working in this way for quite a while. We started off doing what would probably be seen as quite traditional development, like maybe building a hospital and building a school and doing what many NGOs do. But after a lot of study and a lot of doing this, we kind of realised that actually if you want to long-term change a community, that's actually not the most effective thing to do. And I'm going to unpick a bit of that in a minute. But what we found is this process, it's called Church and Community Transformation. We call it CCT for short, because we have too many anagrams at TFM. But this is a really beautiful process, and it starts off by awakening, interestingly, the local church. And so what we do is we work with often church leaders, and we start off with Bible studies. So it might interest you that we're a global NGO, but we start off our development work with Bible studies. And really, honestly, this is discipleship. We start off with Bible studies because we really want to make sure people's mindsets are aligned with the fact they're made in the image of God, they have gifts, they have skills, they have talents, they have some resources already that God has given them in their own community. And we find in many of the countries we work with, we need to start with that mindset shift, because many of the countries and contexts we work in have been used to having this narrative of we are powerless, we can't change our situation, we have to wait for a rich NGO to come in and fix everything for us. And so we actually have to shift our own mindsets in the global north and in the west, but we also have to shift some of those mindsets from people feeling that they actually are powerless and can't bring change to their circumstances. So we start what we're doing in Bible studies and really making sure people have their identity rooted in who they are as Christians and all God's called them to be. And I went to Sierra Leone earlier this year, and I was talking to many pastors who are on this training process. And one of the pastors was really lovely, and he was saying to me, he said, in Sierra Leone, we're one of the poorest countries, and we're like the really poor community in our context. And he said to me, he said, what used to happen is NGOs would come in and they'd maybe build a borehole or they'd do this and then they'd leave and we'd be left again. And sometimes they'd break and we didn't know how to fix them because the NGO had then gone. And they were just used to kind of people coming into their community, doing something and then leaving, and coming in and doing something and leaving. So their expectation was that they had to wait for someone to come into their community. And he also said, because the government is very complex, I'm not going to say a lot about that in this context, it's a very broken and complex government. So they feel like that the government's not going to come and do things for them, and the NGOs, if they're not coming, like, who's going to do things for us? And he said that when he as a church leader was taken through this process, he began to realize that actually God had given them some things in their community. God had given them some land, God had given them some trees, God had given them some fields, and they began to feel empowered, like actually we don't have to wait for somebody because we have already got. And just the way he talked about it, he was like an evangelist for this process. And because I could see that it had given him dignity and it had taken away that feeling of we are powerless to fix our situation, there's nothing we can do. So we start off with Bible studies and we call it awakening or envisioning the church and like discipling their community, that they're not just there to preach the Bible, but they also are, all of them get to play and all of them sort of get to be made in God's image and have resources. So we start there. And then we go through this process where the church come together with their own community, so the people that are outside of the church, and together they go through this process where they identify the needs of their own community, and they also identify the assets and the things that they have got as a community. And this particular pastor, I remember saying to him, what are you most proud of having gone through this process? And he said, oh, that's easy. He said, we were a really cut-off village, but we came together with the local community. We identified that transportation was a real problem for our community. So together, with us as the church and with the community, we identified our need, and then together, we pulled all of our resources. Someone brought sand, someone brought rocks, someone volunteered, and we all came together as the church and the community, and we built a road. So now our infrastructure is really good, and we can like travel down the road and get the kids to school. But they had felt so empowered that they had gone through this journey themselves with training, with facilitation, with some sort of like help in terms of going down this process, and they'd brought that transformation. So church and community transformation is effectively a process that's been really well honed that helps the church work together with the community to together bring transformation. And through that process, we frequently see at Tear Fund, not occasionally, frequently see the church and the community have built a hospital or built a road or built a school, or they have tackled things like trafficking because they've come together as a church and community to think about how they resolve it. And we increasingly see people come to faith and the churches grow in size. We frequently see church buildings being built or needing to be built again because they've outgrown their churches. So that it really empowers the church to be this catalyst of change in the community, and it's a beautiful process. And when you hear people talking about it, it has changed the trajectory of their lives, and it's really brought the kingdom in really practically to their communities. So we're just going to show a really quick video of that, and I'm going to get my colleague Buddy then just to share another story of how that's worked in Burundi.
Over the last 25 years, Tear Fund has partnered with 25,000 churches, empowering them through a process we call Church and Community Transformation, or CCT for short.
It's like an awakening.
The changing the mindset of the communities.
L'enseignement du primaire a impacté ma vie pour que je puisse vraiment aller vers les autres.
So what is CCT? I'll let our friends in Burundi explain.
CCT ni umugambi ukorana n'amashengero y'Ukristo. Uwo mugambi ugakorana kandi n'abanyagihugu. Ni inyigisho zishingiye ku majambo y'Imana, maze bamaze kuyigira hamwe akabahindura mu buryo bw'impwemu no mu buryo bw'umubiri.
After going through those CCT teachings, they discovered that they are able to do the development without external support.
So CCT is enabling churches all over the world to bring holistic transformation and renew hope. But how does it actually work?
We open the eyes of the pastors and the church leadership to see how the church should bring holistic transformation in the community. We always tell them that they should use local resources. So the church leaders start to be the catalyst of the transformation, and the church members identify the problems that are in a community.
At Tear Fund, we believe that the church is at the center of God's plan for healing and restoration of His world. But why the church?
We believe that the church is like a dormant giant. Once awakened, it can just bring transformation in any community.
Diante da maior cheia da série histórica, a igreja também foi demandada dar a sua maior resposta. E aí nós tivemos que retirar 420 pessoas de dentro das suas casas, abrigar 80 pessoas, alimentar estas pessoas.
In addition to rapid response in disaster, communities are being transformed in so many ways due to the Bible-based training of CCT.
When we meet here once a week to learn the Word of God, support each other and listen to testimonies, we go home as renewed and hopeful people.
Akukwata kwe kumazu nakulufwele holilingana byajingoma nabizinguna labe byakunyima byose nakusoloka bya uchi binakuma kahana muzala nawe watuna labe moje uze wunjini
nkuko babivuze abashidikoni kuko twarahangayika iyo umuntu agwaye kumutarika mu ijoro umutwara hariya byaragorana ariko izo nyigisho zimaze kuza harabo umugambi wo kuja hamwe ishengero barakora umugambi wo kubaka ibitaro.
Les autres églises, les autres dénominations qui ont appris notre histoire sont en train de courir vers nous pour que nous allions vers eux pour les aider.
We have worked with over 25,000 local churches in the last 25 years, but our vision is for 250,000 by 2030. £1 invested in CCT equals £28 of social value released. So please, help us support more communities as they help themselves.
Hope you enjoyed seeing that. So this is my lovely colleague Buddy, and he's going to tell you a little bit about Burundi.
Hello, everyone. It's really good to see you all here. Thanks for coming. My name is Buddy, and I've worked for Tear Fund for less than a year. I was a church pastor for a long time. And one of the things that I love about working at Tear Fund, and one of the reasons I chose to work at Tear Fund, is because Tear Fund is passionate about the local church. Completely passionate about the local church. So the work that we do all over the world is based through the local church. You've just seen a few of the stories there about what the church is doing in its community. I wanted to share one more story with you from Burundi. Some of my colleagues visited Burundi last year, and there was a small village called Mubira. And Mubira is at the top of a mountain. It was an 11-kilometer walk to their nearest health center. Now, 11 kilometers may not sound like too far to us because we generally hop in a car, and even cycling that far isn't much. On their roads, that's pretty major. And if you have an emergency trying to get somewhere, an 11-kilometer hike is a long way to go. So as this church began to run the CCT process, we trained the church leader. The church leader ran the Bible studies for his congregation. They were inspired by the story of Nehemiah, which was one of the stories that they had, and Nehemiah's rebuilding of the wall. And so as they were inspired by the Bible, they thought, actually, what our community needs is a health center. That would make a massive difference. So they decided to build a health center. In order to do that, they needed money. So amongst themselves, they raised over 30,000 pounds. They then built their own health center. They then accessed solar panels to put on their health center so they would have power in the health center. They then needed running water in the health center, so they piped water up from the other side of the mountain into the health center so they would have running water. They did that themselves. We didn't do that. They did that themselves. Once all of that happened, the pastor said, "My church is growing. We need a bigger church." So they're now building a bigger church in the community, in addition to planting other churches in the community. So I want to encourage you that when you get involved in church and community transformation, it's not just social action. It is social action, but it's evangelism. It's being what the church was meant to be. It's doing what the church was meant to be doing. Becky is going to talk to you now about our CCT Impact Report. It's amazing. Like I said, we train the church leaders, which means the value for money is incredible, but also the significant impact when you're allowing people to lift themselves out of poverty rather than you trying to lift themselves out of poverty is significant.
Thanks so much, buddy. I never get bored of hearing these stories. I don't know about you. So just one more thing, just to highlight really, rather than massively unpack in this space, is that I touched on this last night when we did our interview, me and Joy. But basically, for a long time, Tear Fund has worked through the church, and we've seen and we've heard amazing results. And I think as Tear Fund, what we've done recently have said, actually, we know the church brings change. We know it transforms lives. Wouldn't it be amazing if we had an independent piece of research that we had like data, so we can actually evidence and prove that. And so for this year, it was only in 2022, last year, we started, and we're going to keep pushing into this, but we interviewed 8,000 individuals over 4 different countries. And we did that really holistically, looking at how CCT brings whole life transformation. So things like their finances, relationships, spirituality, relationships with their community. And it's hard for me to go through this whole now, but there's this amazing chart here, and I've got a few of these I can give away, otherwise it's on the website. But you can see these little blue dots. They're like before communities went into CCT, and they measure things like, did you earn the same or more than last year? Do you think you'll have a better financial situation next year? Do you feel confident to cope with unexpected changes? Do you feel like you belong to a community? So we looked at holistic markers, and on every single marker going through this process, people's lives had been improved improved and transformed. And like I said last night, this was also 9 out of 10 of the communities we interviewed had improved or built from scratch community assets. And so we have found that this way of working is sustainable, because it happens if there's an NGO there or not. It goes from one generation to the next generation. It's really cost effective because the income and the investment goes in the training and the facilitating the process and the leaders, and the data shows it improves community assets. So one of the exciting things, my job is head of church partnerships for Tear Fund, so I speak to leaders all across the UK on a regular basis. And one of the really interesting things is how actually the UK church and the UK audience are beginning to see, what do we learn from development? We want to transform our communities, what can we learn? And so I'm going to pass over to Simon Hawkin, who's done some amazing work. I know he's been to see some of our work in Tear Fund, but he's done some amazing work in local communities with local churches, seeing this process impact the UK. Simon.
Thank you, Becky. And Buddy. That was incredible. I think we could have just had a whole session with you guys, because that was really inspiring to hear Tear Fund's model. And you're absolutely right, Becky. An amazing question is how in the UK? I was really fortunate to go with Tear Fund to Ethiopia in 2019, our local church. I'm part of a live church in Lincoln. We supported the work of Tear Fund into Ethiopia, and I went to visit and saw some of these CCT groups or self-help groups in person and heard their stories. And it was incredible to see people who would describe how by coming together and saving together and studying and learning together and talking about what they already had within their community to make a difference. People had started their own businesses, people had built their own houses, and one group had even built their own school. And I was so inspired by that, and I came away thinking, how can we do something like this for the UK church? And so what I'm going to be presenting to you today is a model which we've called 5D, and it's actually based on a model called Discovery, which Tear Fund pioneered many years previously, which is designed to really help and equip UK churches to think about how can we really engage with our local communities in a really impactful and meaningful way. So I wrote this last year with Andy Frost from Share Jesus International and Gather UK, and asked by Tear Fund to sort of rehash that discovery course, make it a bit newer and refresher, and put in some new learning as well. And that's what we have here as 5D. And this is a process that is designed to help you and your church to go through to ask the right kind of questions as you try and understand and discover your role and the part that you can play in bringing community transformation where you live. I would just like to say the best way to do this is with your community. You know, it's something that you can just do as a group of you from your church, but actually to do it in partnership with people who live in your community, who understand the needs and the challenges and the aspirations and the hopes. That's the best way to do this. So let's have a look through this material and help you to understand it. So we're going to be going through in brief, but if you do want to go through it in more detail, we have got some copies of the book and the resource available, which will just be available at the end of the session for just £7. Well, I think they've discounted it from £7 to $6.99. So, you know, while you're here, you can save that penny. So what is the 5D of community transformation? So it's 5 steps that you can take. The first step, and we'll unpack these a bit more, is discern, which is about understanding the needs, the assets, and the role of the church. Discover is about exploring your community from different perspectives. Dreaming is prayerfully imagining what could be. And those 3 are part of the stage that we call exploration, which is where you're exploring before you launch into anything. And then the final 2 steps, which are part of the mobilization, where you get going, is design and helping you to understand how to create a really excellent action plan. How are we going to do this? And then deliver, launching, staying on track, and doing some great reflections on how what you've started is how it is doing. So they're the 5D steps, and it's actually quite cylinder, because you never quite, it's not linear where you start something and then it just ends. It's always learning as you go. What is it that's needed for today? So let's have a look, shall we, at some of these steps and begin to understand how you can use it in your local church. So the first one, as I've just said, is discern. And this is really about understanding the needs in the community and, importantly, your role as a local church. Now, one of these two phrases might sound familiar to you, where you might hear people saying, I look at the scale of the need and I just don't know how to start. I don't know where to start. Or you're overwhelmed by how big some of the problems seem to be. How on earth are we going to make any kind of difference? And the other thing that you might hear is people just saying, I've got some great ideas, let's just go for it. And without even thinking of asking any questions, we just want to launch something. And maybe, honestly, you might be in one of those camps yourself, or you know people in your church who are like that. The activists who just have an idea and they just want to do it, and those who just feel very overwhelmed. Maybe sometimes you feel a bit of both of those. And really, this is a helpful step, because what it does is just helps you take a bit of a breather and helps you think about the right kind of questions you should be asking, and more importantly, the right kind of lenses that you should be looking at poverty and your community through. So that's what discern is about. So we're going to talk about two lenses and two filters through which we can understand poverty. And the first one of those lenses is to understand poverty through the lens of broken relationships. I'm just going to invite Becky back, actually, because she explains this so well, just to unpack this concept of broken relationships.
Thanks, Simon. That's my last, honestly. So we talk about this quite a lot at Tear Fund, and I touched on this again last night. But I think what we found is that traditionally the view of poverty is very economic-centric. So the idea is that if you have money, or you're perceived to have money, that you don't have poverty, and if you don't have money, that you are in poverty. And when we've really looked into this and studied this and observed this, we found that this creates quite a lot of issues for us and for others. It can create an us and them mindset, like we're okay, they're not okay. And quite a colonial mindset, like we do things for people rather than we do things with people. And it can mean that people's worth is based on money, which again is quite a Western concept. And we can see other people as lesser than us because they don't have the things that we have. And it causes problems for us because if we see poverty as just economic, in that narrative, some of us can place ourselves as the heroes, and we're placing other people as sort of dependents. There's a power dynamic in the understanding of poverty. And also, we can presume that if we have more money than other people, that we know how to help because we have money. And then there's a bit of an assumed arrogance sometimes. I still find this at Tear Fund. Sometimes people come to me and go, we've got some money and we want to build a school in Africa. I'm like, okay, whereabouts? Or do you know they need a school? So we can presume that we have a power dynamic. And so Tear Fund has really done a lot of work on its theology, working globally with theologians. And we now define poverty as broken relationships. First of all, our relationship with God, but also our relationships with ourselves, with one another, and with the world. And reframing this idea of poverty just shifts a little bit our own mindsets. First of all, we all have poverty. It's not an us and them thing. Now, poverty could be struggling with physical or mental health or loneliness or financial problems. I'm a divorced single parent. Like, I know I've had broken relationships that have been traumatic. I know I've had elements of financial poverty in my life. And so actually it reframes it like we all go through seasons. We all have chapters on our life, or sometimes there's things we permanently struggle with. It's not an us and them. Actually, all of us have poverty in our lives. And it also just frames it as we're kind of in it together. We've got things to learn from one another. We've got lessons we can learn. And poverty looks different in different cultures and different contexts, but actually we all start from the same point. And I think in a way this honours people, and it honours what they contribute. It doesn't patronise people. There's no power dynamic there. It doesn't assume. So the first lens I think we're trying to encourage people more to see poverty as, even in their local context, is broken relationships that we all have, and we need to start from a point of collaboration and listening and understanding different viewpoints and different perspectives.
Thanks, Becky. It's interesting to think how that might look then. So someone whose relationship is broken with the earth could look like homelessness, it could look like debt, it could look like hunger. Someone whose relationship is broken with their community could look like people who are lonely, feeling isolated. We saw a tremendous spike of that during the pandemic, people really struggling with loneliness. If people's relationship with themselves is broken, that could look like low self-worth, low self-esteem, self-harm, suicide. And if people's relationship with God is broken, that disconnection from Creator God and that spiritual poverty of not knowing our Creator. And so it's that redemptive story, isn't it? What the church does best is it restores relationships. Everything you do as a church that restores relationship is anti-poverty. You're fighting poverty by restoring communities, by bringing people together. You're fighting poverty when you help someone to build their self-esteem back up. You're fighting poverty every time you do these things, which is really amazing. So that's a really good lens. The second lens is the lens of broken ecosystems, and recognizing that actually there are some things we have control of within our lives, but there are also things that we might have less control of. And there might be some of these ecosystems that lead to issues like powerlessness, this inability to influence policy that affects my life, the inability for me to speak up for myself, and exploitation from others, the inability to challenge injustice, and that lack of confidence, powerlessness in your own situation. Vulnerability, where you might be a victim of prejudice, or you might have a lack of opportunity because of the area that you live, or because of your economic background and education. Isolation, if you're in a marginalized community, someone who has a lack of family support, they don't have that around them. These are ecosystems that people find themselves born into, that they have very little power over. Physical weaknesses as well, people who have illnesses, people who have addictions, and financial insecurity, so places with high unemployment, very little assets in the community. And these are all things that can be strong causes that people feel they have no control over. And so what can we do as a church? Of course, we can speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. We can challenge injustice. We can challenge those structures that exist, that keep people in poverty, whether that's social isolation or whether that's material poverty. So one of the great ways we can do that, and when we're talking about the role of the church here as well, is to begin to understand the asset-based community development approach, ABCD, asset-based community development. And what that simply asks is, if we've recognized issues of poverty, the solution might already be in our hand. The solution might already be in our hand. And of course, the great story here, of course, is when Moses is being asked by God through the burning bush to go and set his people free. And Moses says, how am I going to do that? And God says, well, you're going to organize a fundraiser. You're going to raise a couple of £1 million. You're going to buy a mercenary army, some tanks, maybe some planes, and you're going to build some refugee settlements. You're going to go in with all this resource. And that's not what he said. He simply said, what is in your hand? What have you already got? Moses was carrying a staff. He threw it on the ground. It turned to a snake. He picked it up again. It was a staff. And he said, you've got the power in your hand to do this. What you need, I have already given you. And that's such an important thing for us to remember when we are working with our communities that might feel that sense of powerlessness. We haven't got anything. Well, actually, yes, you do. Let's have a look at what God has already given you, what assets already exist where you live. So we've identified 8 key asset types. And these are the individuals. Each one of us, we ourselves are an asset. The skills, the abilities that we have, our desires, our hopes, we are assets. People together can do incredible things, and we can't underestimate the power of the individual. And when we come together as groups, informal groups, just communities that do life together, there's a power in that, and that is an asset, that mobilization of people. And then one step further than that is when groups become organizations, whether that be a school, whether that be a church, whether that be a sports club. When you have that organization of group, charities, the assets that those are themselves and the difference that they can make. Also place-based assets, physical assets, gardens, green spaces, community buildings. What is it that exist in our locations? And the connections that we have, the connections that we might have with other groups, between organizations, connections that you as your church might have with other churches in your areas. Those are assets because they strengthen and multiply what you can do if you did them on your own. Other resources that you might have, equipment that you might own, knowledge and experience of the people that you have within your community, things that people have done before, the journeys that people have taken. And of course, reputation. If you've had successes in the past and you've done a really good job of something, your reputation is also an asset because it can sometimes open doors for new opportunities that you're able to do. And so really, one of the great things you can do in this Discover step is to actually do a bit of a mapping exercise where you begin to map your community. Even get a big piece of paper out, draw it out. What does our community look like? And what are the assets that already exist within our communities? Where are the buildings? Where's the green spaces? What are the charities? Who are the churches? What are the schools that operate here? Who are the people? Who are potentially the key community leaders that we have? And map those things out. So that's really, really helpful as to really understand that asset-based approach, that it's what has God already put in your hand as a starting point for bringing back community transformation. And the other important thing is to listen and to hear what people are saying. We're going to come on to that in a bit more detail in a moment, but it's so important to listen to your community and not just talk about them. There's a charity called the Poverty Truth Commission, and I love their slogan. It says, anything about us without us is not for us. Anything about us without us is not for us. If we're trying to do things for our community, but we're not involving them, is it really for them? Or are we just doing it because it makes us feel good that we're doing something? Do we really know the challenges people are facing if we're not doing that journey with them? Does that make sense? Okay. I think the other thing to help us when we understand our own role that we have to play is to think about our motivations. What is motivating us to actually go out into our communities and do something as a church? And I'm just going to list 4 motivations, which I think can sometimes actually be unhelpful motivations and reasons why you might start something in your community. And I've used the acronym GO IF. We will go if for this reason. And the first one is growth. Maybe you've heard this before, and maybe it's something you've even said before, something along the lines of, we want to start a new project because we want to do more. We want to have a bigger footprint in our community. We're motivated because we want to do bigger, we want to do better, we want to be a bigger church, we want to have more people. Growth is usually good, but if that's the primary catalyst for starting a new project, then you're focusing more on your own objective rather than the personal objectives of the people you are trying to serve. Churches can also think that starting more community initiatives may have the side effect of attracting people to their church, resulting in a large church congregation. But if that's your main reason for setting up an initiative, you might need to think again. And here's a bit of a challenging question. Does it matter if the people that you are serving or supporting never actually join your church? Does it mean it's fruitless, all the work that you've done? So the O is outside influence. So another negative motivator, outside influence. We started a new project because the council asked us to do it. I can see one or two laughing. Maybe that's been our experience before. I think, we've been there in the past too. Someone said, oh, you'd do such a good job of that. Could you do this too? And that's quite a nice thing to be asked, isn't it? And people think you're doing a good job, they want you to do more. But being asked and trusted to run a new initiative by a council represents a nod of approval for the good work your church might already be doing and deepens the relationship with local government bodies. It can also be a great opportunity to raise the profile of your church in the community. But a good question to ask is, does this fit with our own vision? Are we doing this because other people think we should do it, or is it really our vision? This is what we want to do. This is what we feel God is calling us to do. So it's really helpful to just check that as a motivator for us as well before we go ahead and do anything. The next one is I, and I'm often quite guilty of this one. Ideas. We have this great idea that we know will work. We just, you wake up one morning with this brainwave of an idea of a community project. You think, oh man, wouldn't it be so great if we did this? And so you just crack on. You make it happen. You might be full of amazing ideas about what you could do as a church to play your part in your community. You may even have just one great big idea that you think will have an outstanding impact on improving people's lives. But simply having an idea shouldn't be the deciding factor. And a good question to ask is, do we know this idea truly meets the needs of the people in our community? And the last one, F, the important one of money and funding. The money for it is already there, so why not? You may have been given the offer of some funding to run a project in your local community, and funding is often an essential resource, of course it is. But ideally, securing resources should be part of your project plan rather than the main motivator to get into action in the first place. Otherwise, you could find yourself with an unsustainable project, so that when the funding ends, so does your initiative. So a good question to ask is, would we do this project if the funding wasn't in place? Would we do this project? Is it something we'd want to do anyway, even if the funding wasn't there? Or are we only doing it because we're chasing funding? And I've been there before when you get an alert of a fund that's available. We'd like to fund someone to do this project. And you think, well, we don't do that project, but the money looks good. So maybe we will set up that project so we can access that money, and then we're doing something. But was that really the project that you wanted to do in the first place? So there's just some helpful checks that you can ask yourself before you go into launching something. It's all part of this discerning step. Discerning, what do we really mean by poverty? What are those lenses that we can view poverty through? But also, what's our motivation for doing it? And what is our role to play? Okay, so we're going to do a little bit of chat in our groups in a moment, in where you're sat, because we're going to have a quick look at the discover stage, which is where we actually begin to really understand and talk with and understand what people are really feeling and what they are saying. So here's a picture of a tree, and I want to ask this question: what made this tree this shape? What made this tree this shape? So just chat to people sat where you sat, and maybe come up with 2 or 3 reasons of why this tree looks the way it does. Okay? Just a couple of minutes. What has made that tree this shape? Okay, so that's a bit louder than I thought. All right, so a couple of ideas, thoughts. What has made this tree this shape? Just put your hand up if you've got an idea, and shout it out. Yeah. The type of tree it is, yeah. An oak tree looks very different from a pine tree. The climate, yeah, absolutely. It's hot, cold, yeah. Yeah, okay, a tree stood on its own might grow very differently to one that's in the middle of a forest. Yeah. Yeah, so branches, the shape of it, the way it grows, yeah. Yeah, the roots, what it's getting its nutrition from, what it's drawing from, yeah, absolutely. Any others? Yeah. Yeah, pollution or disease. So a tree that's been, is a diseased tree, might look very different from a healthy tree. Yeah, true. At the back? Yeah, it's in the tree's DNA. So, what seed did it come from? Yeah. Yeah. It looks like it's had some human intervention, doesn't it, that tree? So whether it's been pruned or whether someone's built a tree house in it. Sorry? Yeah, at the back? Weather. Yeah, the weather. Okay. Lots of different reasons, right? Lots of different reasons. Okay, so you can't look at a tree and say it's just this one reason. There's lots of different reasons why a tree looks the shape that it does. And when you look at me or when we look at each other, what has made us the way that we are? Why is it that I act the way I act? Why is it that I behave the way I behave? I was a debt counsellor, and quite often I'd visit people's homes, and what I saw was the same, because the fruit of that of debt had such similar consequences in people's lives that I would often see people who looked and spoke the same because of their circumstances. But I very quickly realised there was lots of different reasons why they were in that situation. It was never just one thing. And the key point here is it's really important we don't create the backstory for people that we meet in our community. When someone who's homeless walks into our church to say, well, I've seen this before, this must be alcohol, or it must be, or whatever you might think it is. Because actually it's so complex and varied, the reasons why people are the way they are. And if we really truly want to understand an issue and how to deal with an issue, we have to understand the complexities and the variety of reasons why people are the way they are. And the only way we can do that is through relationship, through actually connecting with and building relationship with people, getting to know them and inviting them to journey with you, to be on or to join them on their journey, rather than just learning and making some guesses. So that's a really important point. We're going to look at another tree now, though. You can just skip forward. That's it, yeah. And what I'd like us to think about here is we're going to call this tree the problem tree. And what we can do is we can take any issue and name it as a problem tree. And the trunk represents the main problem. So whether that, for example, might be debt. And the roots would then represent the causes of that problem, the many different reasons why that issue might exist. The branches represent the behavioral impacts of that problem. You know, how does it make me behave if I'm experiencing this issue? And then the fruit and the leaves represents the results and the wider implications. What does that mean in my life? What does it mean for those around me? So if we look at the next one, it just shows you, if we take it the example of debt, then we might be able to look at this and say, you know, we can understand the complexities of what might lead to someone being in debt. For example, redundancies, broken relationships, low income, poor decisions might lead to debt. And the behavioral impact from that is stress, low self-esteem, people feeling perhaps withdrawn or avoiding the post, avoiding picking up the phone. And the fruit of that then could lead to, if that tree is not dealt with, it could lead to homelessness, feeling alone or cold, people with disconnected power supply, hunger. And so we can see that when we want to tackle a tree like debt, we have to be aware of the complexities, those implications and those roots around it. So what I'd like to do is to have a conversation, again, with groups where you are at. And I want us to take we're going to think about a tree which represents food poverty. And I'd like you to think about what might the root causes of food poverty be, what might be the behavioural impacts be, how someone might behave if they're experiencing it, and what would be the fruit of that if that tree was never dealt with. So have a little think about what this tree might look like for food poverty. All right. So we've had a go at doing this for the topic of the tree of food poverty. So, and hopefully, I imagine if we were to bring all the ideas together, we would have a very complex, lots of roots, lots of branches. Let's just take a few examples. Would anyone like to give me an example of one of the roots of food poverty? Yeah. Global food prices, yeah, that can be one of the roots, one of the causes that people find themselves in food poverty. Yes. Any others? Yeah. Addiction, yeah, addiction. So that could mean that money is being spent on other things, the wrong things, and there's no money for food. Yeah, okay. Any other examples, roots? Sorry? Being frightened to ask for help. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that might lead to food poverty because if you know you've got a need, but you're too scared to ask for help or make other people aware. Great. Oh, yeah. 0-hour contract. Yeah. Yeah, and that insecurity of employment can be a really big issue for many people. Not knowing if I'm going to get paid this month, is there going to be money for food? Yeah. Yeah, so expensive options, and it's very, if it's particularly in a community where there's not many shops, and you have to rely on one, and it's expensive, and it's not a great variety. Yeah, let's just have another. Thanks, you got some answers as well, but we're just going to move on to what some of perhaps the branches, the behavioural impacts might be for food poverty. Any thoughts? How might it affect the way you behave? Yeah. Poor educational attainment, yeah, great. So if you're not getting a good diet, so there's been links between, in schools, kids having a healthy start to the day, lunch and breakfast. Without that, can lead to poor educational attainment, yeah. Socially withdrawn, yeah, okay. That could be one of the behaviours, yeah. Yeah, more, yeah, that's health outcomes, was that, yeah. Poor health outcomes. And so what might some of the fruit then be, the fruit of this for you? If it's unchecked and you go and you don't deal with food poverty, what could the fruit of that be? Okay, yeah, so it could one of the outcomes could lead to stealing, to be shoplifting, to be able to eat. A reliance on food banks, yeah. Dependency on handouts, yeah. Maybe one more? Reproduce trees like you, yeah. It's very good because the fruit of a tree is the seed of a new tree, isn't it? And the poverty cycle, whether that's generational or within your community. Very good. And so this is really helpful to understand because when you want to address a need or a challenge in your community, it's really helpful to have this holistic viewpoint of what does this challenge really mean and where is it coming from? Because if we want to take this tree down, we need to start at the roots, but we also have to be aware of the impact it's having on people's lives and what can we do to support those people who have reached that stage with this issue. So another part, a key part of the discover stage is to seek out other perspectives. What do other people think? Now your view, your perspective is, if you just go back a couple of slides for this one, your perspective is a really valid perspective. Sometimes we have great intuition or God puts things in our minds, in our hearts, and it's absolutely brilliant that we can come with our own perspective. But it is just one perspective. It's so important to gather a spectrum and a range of other perspectives. And those include, as well as your own, the perspective of the people who live in your community. That goes without saying. Have you actually asked the people who live in your community what they think the challenges are and what they think the solutions are needed? Have you asked the other organisations who are already operating in your community? Are there other charities and other churches who are already doing work? What do they see? I had a really interesting call during the lockdown with a local authority in the north of Lincolnshire who said, during the pandemic, 22 community groups set up a food bank on the same estate. They all had the same idea about what was needed, and they all set up a food bank on the same estate because they weren't talking to each other. They needed to get the perspective of other organisations and other churches. What do we together think is the problem? And the two things that are highlighted there is duplication and gaps. Are there things where we're duplicating? If there are, should we start working together so we're not just doing it independently? Where are the gaps? Are there actual problems that nobody is addressing and no one is doing anything about at all? So it's really important to gather perspectives of others as other organisations who are working in your community as well. Also, the perspective of the local authority or government statistics. And you can research those really easily online to find out what are the actual health statistics, the education statistics, the crime statistics for my community and my neighbourhood, because they might actually reveal a problem that nobody is perhaps talking about, but is there. It's happening in our communities. Are we talking with the police? Are we talking with the local authorities? And then, most importantly, is God's perspective. What is God saying? And this whole process needs to be done prayerfully, inviting God into that journey to speak with us and to guide us as to what we and our community can be doing together. And this leads us into the dream section, step 3. And I just want to show us a Venn diagram, which I think helps tie this together. That's the one, where we take our view, but we also take the views of others. We bring it alongside the local facts. And perhaps God is beginning to reveal something to us where we see some of these things that people are saying are overlapping. Is God actually saying something to us and revealing that everything is saying something that we feel passionate about, something that our community is asking for, backed up by what the stats are saying? And asking God, can you just help reveal some threads, and can you help show us these real needs, and can you help bring those things together for us, give us some direction? So as we begin to dream of solutions with our community together, what is it that we can do together to overcome these trees, these issues, these problems? Here are some helpful questions we can ask. What is already out there? What do we already have in our hand? What assets do we have in our community? Do we have to go out and seek external resources? Have we already got the power within our hands? How can we empower people to overcome these rather than just fixing people's problems for us and having that saviour complex of we're the ones, the church with the solutions and our community has the problems? But how do we actually bring solutions that empower people to overcome those challenges themselves? What scale of response is sustainable to meet the need? There isn't an overwhelming response to set up a huge mega project which is going to run out of funding after two or 3 months. What's a sustainable response? And of course, what ideas do we have that can work? And then what the 5D book then takes through is the final 2 stages are design. How do we actually go about creating a really good plan for how we're going to do this? And also step 5, how are we going to deliver this? How are we going to keep this going? How are we going to keep evaluating so that we know that what we are doing is working and is truly making a difference? And so that's the 5D resource. And what we found in our community, in our church, is what an impact this has made on the way that we have done community transformation. And so I just want to tell you a story about the work that I'm involved with at Acts Trust in Lincoln and how this process has really helped and transformed what we do and the incredible fruit of that and the impact. So actually it's bigger than just our own church and our own charity. In Lincoln we have something called Transform Lincoln, and a part of Transform Lincoln is which is a network of churches working together. It's our church unity movement in the city. And a part of that is our work around social action, community development, which we call the Active Faith Network. It's how is our faith being active in our communities. And when we first got together as churches, we asked ourselves the questions, well, what are the needs? What are people saying are the challenges in our community? And one of the big threads that came from that was around mental health and how actually mental health was an increasingly growing problem for many, many people in Lincoln. Lincoln had the highest suicide rate in the country for men in the sort of younger adult age category. And that's a statistic that we just think is unacceptable for our city. We can't let that continue. Mental health in terms of depression, people with stress and anxiety, and we begin to ask ourselves the question, as churches working together, what can we do about this to bring that awful statistic down and to provide hope for people who are struggling with their mental health? And a small subgroup was formed from that who wanted to focus on health and well-being. And one of the ideas that came from that, after visiting and listening and learning from others, was the idea of setting up something called mental health crisis cafes, which is the idea there is that in the evening, when all the other services have closed, the crisis team have gone home, and the only place you can go if you're having a mental health crisis is A&E, which is the worst place to go if you're having a mental health crisis. Can the churches provide a light at night that is a place where someone can go to find hope and friendship? And so we began to explore what it might look like in Lincoln for us to open up mental health cafes in the evenings. And we invited, as part of this process, the NHS, the team who were doing this, the subgroup, invited the NHS to say, you know, we've had some ideas about maybe this, but what are you seeing and what do you think is needed? And their response was, this is amazing. We are looking for people who can actually do this and provide this non-clinical support for people in a mental health crisis. And they said, if we fund the churches, can you have your doors open in the evening for people who are struggling with mental health? And of course, the response to that was, yes, we can. And so in Lincoln, we've now set up something called Night Light Cafes. And the idea behind it is that every night of the week, including Christmas Day, there is always somewhere in the city with a light on, that if you're struggling with mental health, somewhere you can go. And we have the police referring to it, the GPs refer to it, social prescribers, doctors, teachers, charity workers, churches. If anyone is struggling, they now say the place you need to go is church. And this has been such an incredible model that we now are running it across the county. There are now churches across the whole county running nightlight cafes across Lincolnshire. And in September, we're really excited because we're launching Twilight Cafes, which is for young people who are struggling with their mental health and their families, in partnership with a local church called Bridge Church. And we are so thrilled that this is happening. And this is what is the fruit of this project. The suicide rate for men in Lincoln is no longer the highest in the country. It has come down. Since 2020, when we launched cafes, it has now come down. Every week we are getting testimonies of people say, if I didn't come to the cafe, I think I might have ended my life. I would have gone home, I would have self-harmed. This has saved my life. And it's just brilliant because now, when people are struggling with their mental health, the place where they find that is in the church. And isn't that great? The church is the hope for our community. As the guys from Tearfund shared, it is God's tool for bringing transformation is the church. And we were so excited about that. But we couldn't have reached that point if we hadn't gone through a process like this of discovering, of really understanding, well, what is our role as a church? What really are the needs? What are people already doing? What are people saying that they need? And how can we bring our ideas? Where is God's thread through that? And from that point, connecting with others to make this incredible project happen. So that's an example of how CCT can really work in your community. And if you're inspired by what you've heard from Tearfund or what you've heard from the examples in Lincoln, and you think we want to have the same kind of transformation where we are, first thing is learn from others. Create friendships with other churches in your area. Create friendship groups where you can learn best practice. What have you done that's worked? What have we done that's worked? You know, you don't always need to have a resource or a book from someone else. You might already be able to learn that from sharing with each other. But if you do want to book a resource, you can also buy the 5D book, which does guide you through that process really, really well. Inspired by Tearfund, and that's available to purchase for that, like I said, at discounted price, $6.99. So please do get your hand on that. The other thing that you can do is we have some training days coming up in October, where we're going to unpack this across a full day, really hands-on practical day. Those are October the 10th, 11th and 12th. and they are there's one in Leeds, which is probably the nearest one to us, and I believe that is on Wednesday the 11th of October. If you're interested in booking onto that, you just need to go to the Share Jesus website. Sorry, I've meant to put it on the slides, but if you type in Share Jesus International 5D, then you'll be able to find a link to the booking page to get yourself booked onto that. And maybe you want to bring your church group with you and come together, or people from your community, where you can go through, learn how to do that process together for yourselves. So Share Jesus International 5D, if you search that online, you'll find the link, and the Leeds is the nearest one. There is also one in Belfast on the 10th of October and in London on the 12th of October. And the other thing you might want to do as well is, if you want to learn more about Tear Fund and the work that they are doing, you can sign up to their mailing list as well. And you can do that by talking to Becky or Buddy after this session. They'll take your details down, and you'll be able to get information about their work straight to your inbox, so that you can stay in touch with them and hear about the incredible work they're going to be doing. So I'm just going to hand back to Joy now, because we're just going to open this up for a bit of a Q&A session. If anyone would like to ask any questions for the guys from Tear Fund or from myself about 5D, and then I imagine from there we'll blend into our reception.
Let's thank Simon and Becky. Yeah, so good. Such a great model. Do you know, the thing that I love so much about the work of Tear Fund and this model, there's so many things that I could say, but the one thing that I would just say that really inspires me is that for so long, the flow of support from the West has gone to the developing nations from the church to say, we've got the answers and we want to rescue you. And some of that just is about making us feel a bit better. And the beauty of this is not just that it empowers the local church to be the solution wherever they are, but that we have had an opportunity to learn so much from them and then apply their stuff to our context. And I just think, wow, how amazing is God when the church works. Everyone learns together, and it's no longer, or we are working in partnership to kind of change that whole paternalistic flow of aid, and we're seeing development and life spring up where we have mutual connection and relationship, and I just think that's the kingdom. So beautiful. So anyone got any questions? Becky and Buddy are also available to take your questions. So please do put your hand up or jump up on your chair, or why don't you sit just in pairs. Think about one thing that you've been inspired by or you've learnt today, and anything else that you're curious about. And then if that sparks some questions, you can jump on your chair. So one thing you've been inspired or you've learned, and anything you're curious about.
It isn't actually, and hearing is so bad.
It's bad. Yeah. Oh, it's really good. No, it's really good. It's always good. I've written some questions for you. Yeah.
funny as well.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Hopefully I won't get any. It's Simon to get them all, but...
Oh, no.
Okay. Anything you're curious about? And you'll have to shout loudly. This isn't a roving mic, so yeah, Joe. Okay, so that question for those of you in the room, I think was aimed at Simon, and is how do you staff the evening cafe and what sessions are offered? What training is offered?
Yeah, okay, so each cafe, certainly the way the model we've done is that each cafe is run by a different church. So every night of the week there's a cafe, but it's a different church takes responsibility for a different night. And different churches might do it in different ways, but generally what happens is you have a team of volunteers who might be on a rota, so they're not there. It's not the same people every week, and so there are at least 3 present, ideally more, who would have roles like just greeting people, hospitality, but also then to be able to talk and chat with people. And the training for that, there's a number of different training. For example, mental health first aid is an excellent course that you can do. Suicide awareness training is also really excellent. Simple coaching and befriending training where you learn techniques and just how to befriend people in a safe way, in an effective way, is really excellent. Safeguard training, which is really essential. So those kind of like the kind of key building blocks for the training that people would receive. And the other thing that is offered to those volunteers is once a month, if they need it, they have access to clinical supervision. So if people are, because obviously when you're having conversations with people who might be sharing with you some traumatic things or some very difficult things, that has an impact on us as well, and we can carry that, and we might need a way to be able to process it ourselves. And so to have that outlet where we can share, and there's always a debrief every night anyway, so the team can share with each other what's happened, but that chance to have that professionally with the clinical psychologist once a month is also part of the offer to the volunteers that do that as well.
Great. Anyone else? Any other curiosities? Do you want to shout really loudly? Great. Okay. Yeah. So that's about. Is this for Simon? Or for across? It'd be interesting across the world. Okay. Multi-faith. So if you're working with churches and Christians, but then how do you work with people from other faiths?
Sure, that's a really good question. Actually, as Tear Fund, and I'm going to, because Chris said quite a lot on this, so I won't say too much now because I haven't got time, but we do a lot of self-help groups through this process, and often the self-help groups are for anybody in the community, and often they're cross-faith. So when I went to Rwanda, I think last year, maybe the year before, there were self-help groups with a number of Muslims and Christians, all in the self-help group, all of them sort of being empowered to try and help them start businesses. So we definitely, and also in the community, we would work with the local community, with other faiths in the communities. That is something we see a lot. And we've got probably some incredible stories of peace and reconciliation through communities working together. I think we've got one story of like a Muslim community helping the Christians build their church, So there's some really beautiful stories that I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, but we definitely work cross-faith in the context we work in.
Yeah. I'm just thinking of an example with we've launched a community grocery with a message in Lincoln. There's Kev at the back and Kerry, our managers, and we have loads of different people on the team volunteering. Some who are Christian, some who have other faiths, some have no faith, and it's really great to actually include everyone, because if we're doing something for the community, we want to involve the community, and if we're involving the community, we have to involve everybody in the community, and so it's really excellent. But at the same time as that, we have specific and certain roles that we might say, but actually we really want these particular roles to be someone who's Christian. So for example, connected to our community grocery, we have a cafe space. And one of the roles that we have is cafe pastors, a bit like street pastors. So people who've done their shopping, they might want to just come and sit down, have some tea to drink and chat. And we're thinking we want to have some befrienders in that space who can really chat to people and offer prayer and invite them to church. And we're looking to be launching Alpha courses there as well. And so we might say, for certain roles that we might define, might say, but these we really feel we want these to be Christians in these particular roles. But that doesn't mean that there are no roles that others can be a part of. Does that make sense?
Great. We'll take one more question, and then these guys will be around if you want to kind of talk to them. I'm sure they'd be really happy to do that. So anyone else? One more question. Yes. Okay, I'll just say that for the room, just in a nutshell. How do you work with other agencies, build trust and partnership with people, particularly kind of public sector agencies? I'm guessing, Simon.
I remember actually when I was first working in Lincoln as a debt counsellor with CAP, I remember I used to go to a lot of forums where there was other organisations around the table, and it was often chaired by the local authority. And in the initial, going back 2006, at that time, I always felt when I was in the room, people were like a little bit suspicious as to why I was there and why does the church want to be at this table. And I even had it said to my face in one meeting when another agency manager said, I wish we were the only people doing debt counselling in our city, because then we can guarantee the standard of the service. And what he was really saying is, I'm not sure you Christians really know what you're doing. And actually, I think the way we've built trust is by just always turning up and always being present and always offering help and proving our worth to the city through our good deeds and through our actions. We just didn't take that and back off and go away. We just kept turning up to those meetings, kept on saying, how can we help you? How can we support you? With our local authority, asking questions like, what are the challenges that you're having? Is there anything that the churches can do to support that? And I think what that's done over time has built trust. Actually, the churches, they mean what they say. There's no hidden agenda here. They just genuinely do want to serve our city. So, and I would say that the landscape in Lincoln, and others from other churches hopefully will back me up on this, is so welcoming now to the churches that it's almost like we have an open invitation to, when things are happening, they want to say, we should ask the churches what they think, and perhaps do they want to help get involved. But I think it just comes from being just faithfully turning up and always offering yourselves, what can we do to help, what are your challenges, and what can we do to support you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming. I'm going to ask Becky to pray for us all, actually, if that's okay. And then I'll just finish with a couple of final comments. Go.
Thanks. Yeah, Father, I just thank you that you are a good God, and your heart is to see restoration around the whole world, to see restored relationships, people come to faith, people involved in community and loved, and people really living in the fullness of who you made them to be. And I just pray every single one of us would feel stirred to play our part in seeing the kingdom come. That whatever that is, wherever we live, I just pray, Father, we'd walk close to you, we'd listen close to you, and we'd be available to serve your vision, because it's your vision. You said to pray, your kingdom come on earth as in heaven. And we ask that more of your kingdom come, and we ask that we all be just willing servants of serving that big vision. I pray your blessing on every single person in this room, that they will run the race you've marked out for them, and they will just serve you with good hearts, Lord Jesus, and see the kingdom come in their communities. Amen.
Well, let's thank Becky and Simon and Buddy for their input. It's been great, really inspiring. Just to mention, before you go, a friend of ours, Nick Amos from Cinnamon Network, is here to interact with you all, especially in the kind of next section with the community workers reception. But he's got information about the kind of resources that Cinnamon offer to local church doing community work, and it's really impressive, really, really supportive and resourceful and helpful. So please go and say hi to Nick. Nick, just put your hand in the air. This is Nick, and he'll be just over there on this stand here. We'll start again at 4 o'clock. It's got 8 minutes. Feel free to nip to the loo. Feel free to go if you're not really a community worker and you don't want to stay. There is refreshments at the back for those of you that are staying. Please go and help yourself. And then on this table, there are labels for names, and if you're staying, I would really love it if you could just pop your name on and pop it somewhere obvious. That would be great. So, we'll come back in a few minutes.